Well, good evening, and welcome to the Medved home. I'm Michael Medved. We are in the Seattle area, and I'm here with my beautiful wife, Dr. Diane Medved. We are the co-authors of a book that came out
a while ago?
Yeah, it's actually 20 years ago, 19 years ago, 1997. But she was also instrumental, of course, in the creation of the new book, The American Miracle. And this is a live book signing. Now, I've done many book signings in the past. This is my 13th book, and including Saving Childhood, which we wrote together. But I've never done a live book signing online like this, but I am actually going to be signing these books for you, and for people who have ordered books, we will take your questions, and I'm going to try to respond to as many questions as I can while I'm signing books, showing that I'm occasionally capable of doing two things at once. And here, look, a real signature I just signed. That's a demonstration of what we are doing. The American Miracle is the book I have been actually dreaming about writing and wanting to write for a quarter century, for a very long time. I studied American history at Yale, and I got departmental honors in American history. And one thing that has always struck me, and since I was a little boy, my late father used to take me when I was a small kid, growing up in Philadelphia, to historic sites like Independence Hall to see the Liberty Bell and to see where the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were written in the same room. Imagine that. And my late father, whose own life was something of an American miracle, really had a sense that there was something supernatural about our country. He was born after his parents reunited. My grandfather had come over originally in 1910, and he was separated from his family back in Russia, my grandmother, and her six children, his six children. They were separated through the years of World War I and the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War. By the time my grandmother was able to join him in Philadelphia, she had seen 5 of her children die from starvation and the hardship and the tough times of the war. And when she reunited with her husband, my grandfather, there was a terrible fear that they would be that she got sick right after they came back together, and she couldn't keep her food down and things were terrible. She was 48 years old, so it was, and she had just lost 5 children. So she very reluctantly went to a doctor where they lived in South Philly. And she said, "Well, doctor, it's a tumor, isn't it?" He said, "No, it's not a tumor, it's a baby." And she said, "That's not possible, is it?" And he said, "Well, actually, your name is Sarah, right?" And she was Sarah Medved. Our daughter, Sarah, is named after her. So my father was an American miracle. He came into being after his parents reunited after great hardship. And he always had this sense during his career as a physicist and a NASA scientist and an academic and a scientist astronaut briefly. He had this sense of America as a miraculous place where anything was possible. And again, it is impossible to study the history of this country and think it's an accident. And that's what this book does. This book looks at 12 amazing episodes that blow me away as a student of history and as a writer about history, that it seems to me indicate beyond any reasonable doubt that this country is not the reflection of some kind of random collection of forces. This country is a demonstration of intelligent design. And you know what? And it's not intelligent design just by really smart people, our founders. How do we know that? Because those people all saw themselves as instruments of a higher power. They did, including the people who were religiously unconventional, like Franklin and Jefferson, even Thomas Paine. And that's part of what the American Miracle exists to do, is to tell a series of stories that are so amazing that you truly have to sort of shake your head and think, how did this happen? Well, it was meant to happen. And that's the theme of the book. The subtitle is Divine Providence in the Rise of the Republic. And I think we have some questions.
Yes, there are a lot of listeners and people who know your work and who are eager to buy the book and who submitted questions in advance of your book signing. And so what we're going to do is go through and read some of those questions that were already submitted.
Okay.
And you can answer them, we can discuss them. Also, we're going to be taking any phone calls that come in as they occur. So the first question that's up here is, what did you discover in the rise of America that you know without wavering was Providence? That's from Jerry in Fort Worth.
Well, Jerry, that's a great question. And the one thing where I think can be no wavering at all is the episode with which I begin the book, which was the 50th anniversary of America, 4th of July, celebrating the Declaration of Independence, our grand jubilee. And they called it the Jubilee year, of course, based on the Bible. In the book of Leviticus, the 50th year is the Yovel year, you say in Hebrew. It's Jubilee. America felt so incredibly lucky. This experiment had survived for 50 years, for half a century, and the two guys who were most responsible for that declaration were both alive. And Adams, John Adams, who had been the Atlas of Independence, who fought for that resolution declaring independence, he was 90. Thomas Jefferson was 83. They were bitter rivals who became close friends, as they had been close friends before they were rivals. Second president of the United States, third president of the United States. And Adams' son, John Quincy Adams, was sitting in Washington as president to preside over this grand jubilee. And they both issued statements. They both were invited to Washington for a grand ceremony. They both were too old and frail to make it. And then the most amazing thing happened, is that on that particular holiday, that great day, July 4th, 1826, at the end of the day, just as the fireworks were fading, and they had fireworks in Quincy, Massachusetts, and a thunderstorm had sort of come up, summer thunderstorm, John Adams passed away. He died on July 4th, 50 years. And his last words that were reported by the people who were right at his bedside were, "Jefferson survives." His last thoughts were of Thomas Jefferson. He didn't know that 6 hours before, same day, Jefferson died. Okay, people who compute the odds, there is no way. It is 745 times more likely to draw 10 straight flushes in poker than to have this come up. Two presidents, the only two presidents who died on the same day, the only three presidents who died on the 4th of July at all, those two, and James Monroe was another founding father who died exactly 5 years later on the 4th of July. And these are the two guys who are most involved with not just the 4th of July, but the 50th 4th of July. I cite in the book some of the funeral orations that spoke about these two great men, and literally everyone in the country and around the world saw this as a sign from heaven that there was something intentional, spooky almost, about the American miracle.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good answer. Okay,
Thank you. Thanks, Teach.
Well, the truth is I've read the book,
Yeah,
and it's amazing. So what do you expect?
Thank you. Not only read the book, but edited it and helped with it as you do with everything I do.
Okay, the next question comes from Brian in Delaware. Michael, do you think it's possible for Americans to again engage in more civil political discourse? Or have we crossed a point of no return with cable, internet, news, echo chambers? And he also adds, many thanks for your historical broadcasts and past books. They've enriched my family for many years. Thanks also for your support of Hillsdale College. Because of your show, our oldest son attended Hillsdale and he graduated valedictorian in May 2015.
Wow, that makes me very proud. And by the way, tomorrow morning I'm going to be on Hillsdale College Radio live, which I love. You never pass the point of no return. I mean, one of the things about American history is that just when things seem to be sliding into the abyss, there's a revival and a restoration. We've had 3 great awakenings that people point to, and yes, they do tend to be religious awakenings in the country, and the first great awakening of the 1740s resulted in the American Revolution and independence and this whole glorious country that we live in. The second Great Awakening in the 1830s and 40s resulted in the abolition movement and ridding the country of the hideous crime of slavery. Will it take some kind of awakening to return to a more civil discourse? Look, after this campaign that we just went through, which was, no, look, everybody was, I think it wasn't just Secretary Clinton and President-elect Trump who were glad that the campaign was over. But here's the interesting thing. Because that campaign was so nasty and so vicious and so small, I think in one way that it kind of reassures the people, and it's part of, I think, the feeling that people have, which is a good feeling about this forthcoming administration, for most people, many people, is that the fighting wasn't about ideology. It wasn't about implacable differences. It was very personal. It was very small. So the possibility now of people getting together and really doing something, I think, to move us in the direction of reform, the possibility is very good. And my prayer for the president-elect is very much that he will lead the way to returning civility and dignity to our public life. And yes, I believe that would be an American miracle, but I believe miracles are possible.
Somebody ought to take away his Twitter account.
Yeah, I think that's actually, that I think is the best single piece of advice to give the president-elect. Put Twitter aside.
Yeah,
give it a rest for 4 years, maybe for 8.
He'll never put that aside. Never.
Well,
it's his instant power, his instant gratification.
We'll see. Stranger things have happened, as the book documents.
Yes, and they're all miracles, so it's possible. Okay, let's go to another question. This one doesn't have a person behind it, but this election proved that the electoral college system is clearly broken. What steps, if any, can be made to help move toward the eradication of the EC?
Well, I don't believe it's beneficial to eradicate the Electoral College because it's an essential part of American federalism. In other words, if we get rid of the Electoral College, states become much less significant. And really, there is no reason that any candidate for president would ever again visit Wyoming or Rhode Island, or even Connecticut for that matter. I mean, you might reach some of Connecticut through New York media, but I think the Electoral College has a real function and is worth preserving. What needs to be done, however, is reforming the Electoral College. And the way you reform the Electoral College is not doing the winner-take-all. Because this is one of these things that's very, very striking, is I know for Mitt Romney, he got more votes from the state of California, popular votes. He got over 4 million than he did in any other state. And yet he got 0 electoral votes from California. You see, that winner-take-all thing it was almost a tie in Michigan, but Donald Trump gets all the Michigan electoral votes. Hillary Clinton got nothing. What they should do, it seems to me, is have proportional representation. Now, this would still give a disproportionate weight to small states, and I think that's important. That's what the constitutional founders had in mind. But it would be more reflective of the actual will of the people. By the way, on that standard, I think Trump would still probably win, but it would be very close in the Electoral College.
You really think he would still win?
Yeah, because...
Even though Hillary got 2 million more votes?
Well, because Trump carried 30 states. And see, by carrying 30 states, you would instantly, even if you had proportional representation, you would instantly be guaranteed 2 electoral votes, the ones that are associated with U.S. senators.
Yeah, but if it's proportional, there are states where it was close enough that it would have been a totally different outcome.
Correct, there's some, but a lot of the states that Trump won, he won by a huge margin. Do you know,
Florida?
No, but he won by a bigger margin in Florida than Obama did over Romney. And plus you'd have to, and there are a bunch of states like Wyoming. Well, no, Wyoming he'd get all 3 states. Do you know, but this is the point, Trump got 70% of the vote in Wyoming. And I don't think that you dispense with the importance of people's votes just because they live in states that are thinly settled and remote.
Well, that doesn't mean you get rid of their votes, but I mean, people in California.
Yeah, and by the way, the basic thing about the Electoral College, and I've said this on the show many times, it's not going anywhere. Because in order for the Electoral College to be abolished, you really do need to amend the Constitution. And you can only do that kind of constitutional amendment with 38 states, right? There will always be more than 13 states that want to keep the Electoral College because they're little states that don't want to be ignored.
Okay, the next question. Dorsey in Stone Mountain, Georgia. We've been there, actually.
Yeah.
I know. He asks, how can we get away from the political correctness mania?
I think we've just made a giant step in that direction by electing Donald J. Trump as President of the United States. Has there ever been a candidate who is more politically incorrect? Now, I don't think that there's the same thing as decency and political correctness. Decency ought to be preserved. Political correctness, I'm glad for it to end up on the scrap heap of history, and I think it's headed in that direction.
Okay. Next question. Since there has been a lot of talk about what the president-elect will do with his company upon taking office, then the answer is, what did Hillary do with the Clinton Foundation while serving as Secretary of State? What about those conflicts?
And there are tons of conflicts there. I am less obsessed, and I've said almost nothing on the show about Mr. Trump and his company and his business interests. I think this is a false issue. It's a red herring. I have had a lot of problems, as people know. I had a lot of problems with candidate Trump, President-elect Trump, but this is not one of them. I mean, the whole idea of blind trusts are ridiculous. Unless he sells everything, you still know what's going to be in that blind trust. And look, what you have to do is make sure that you vote for someone who you trust enough not to put his business interests ahead of the country's interests. And I really don't think that Mr. Trump is going to do that. I believe him when he says, look, right now, my most important job, my only important job, is making America great again. And we should all pray, that he achieves it.
Okay, I won't pursue it. Let's see, how about being a public figure, how do you overcome adversity in the media?
You ignore it. One of my favorite quotes, and it's associated with a number of famous people, including a Nobel Prize winner named, Peace Prize winner named General Jan Smuts of South Africa. He said, "The dogs bark, but the caravan moves on." Meaning, okay, there'll always be barking dogs, but you got to go somewhere. You got to reach your destination. Yeah.
Well, and now I'm particularly proud of you because you are very true to your beliefs, and I'm proud to be your wife.
Thank you.
On that. Okay, another question. If you were to give one piece of advice to our future POTUS, what would it be?
Ditch the Twitter account.
Okay.
That we've already talked about. But beyond that, another piece of advice is to remember at all times that great and successful leaders turn enemies into friends. Unsuccessful and disastrous and small leaders turn friends into enemies. Mr. Trump has shown in the transition, and it's one of the reasons I'm so much more encouraged about him than I thought I ever would be. He's shown in the transition that he is interested in turning enemies into friends. And the ultimate statement of that would be Mitt Romney as Secretary of State of the United States.
Has he appointed him yet?
No, but they had their second meeting. They met over dinner, second date. So they're getting pretty serious.
Well, good.
What was interesting to me is they ate frogs' legs.
I know, you talked about that on your show today. They ate frogs' legs of all the most ridiculous ways to cement a friendship.
Well, I don't know, who knows? I don't know which one of them particularly likes frogs' legs. Maybe they both do, and maybe, okay, we've never experienced frogs' legs. There's never will, very little in the world that is more definitively non-kosher than frogs' legs.
I'm sure there are many things that are equally non-kosher.
Well, snails, yeah, but
A lot of
go
French
ahead.
food.
They were serving baby lamb, grilled sirloin, and scallops and frog's legs.
Well, you know that the new president is not a vegetarian.
No, I think that's emphatically true.
Okay.
But he is, by the way, he does have something in common in dietary habits with Mitt Romney, and they have something in common, which I write about in the book, with Abraham Lincoln.
Which is?
Teetotalers.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, President Trump doesn't drink.
And certainly not Mitt Romney.
We know Mitt Romney is never drunk, and Lincoln was a supporter of temperance. He gave this when he was a young man, and I write about it in the book. This guy growing up incredibly poor with a hard-drinking father, we think, Thomas Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And he gave this moving speech to a temperance union in southern Illinois when he was just a young rising politician, and he never consumed alcohol.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
so
good. Not much in the White House. We have a phone call.
Oh.
Matt from Ohio is on the phone for you.
Matt from Ohio. Hello, swing state Matt.
Here, hold this here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hey, thanks a lot for doing this. I'm really enjoying it so far.
Well, thank you.
I think I have a bit of a tough question for you. We'll see. It might be easy. But are there any incidents from recent history, maybe like the past 15 or 20 years, that you think people will eventually look back on and see as an act of divine providence on behalf of this country?
Okay, my prayer is that they'll look back on this crazy election as somehow an act of divine providence. Yes, that's my hope. And Matt, the other event, and it's not 15 or 20 years, but it is 35 years ago. In 1981, President Reagan had just started in the White House. He'd been president for 2 months. And he shot. And he took a bullet that came less than a half inch to his heart. He almost bled to death, went into shock. In other words, they were going to take him back to the White House after he was wounded. If they had made a decision to go to the White House first, he would have died. But they made the right decision and rushed him to the hospital, and they performed emergency surgery, and he made a remarkable recovery. That deliverance, I think, is providence. And in fact, it was within 6 weeks that another great man, St. John Paul II, the Pope, John Paul II, was also shot. And another old man that the world needed desperately, and he took a bullet in the gut, and it was also just less than an inch from killing him. The fact that those two survived allowed America to achieve what I honestly believe it is the greatest thing America has ever achieved, which is victory in what is called the Cold War, but victory against this evil, evil system of communism, which, by the way, is one of the reasons I'm so driven crazy by the morons out there who want to praise and excuse Fidel Castro. That's not right. And by the way, this allows me to explain something else about this book. This book covers American miracles from 1620 and the truly amazing story of the Pilgrims and stuff about the Pilgrims that you don't probably know anything about, all the way through Abraham Lincoln's life and service. And there is a second volume that I'm working on right now that covers further examples of providence from 1865 through the Reagan assassination and one hopes to the current day. So a great question. By the way, I noticed that this young man from Ohio who was calling, Matt, and his last name was McKnight. And I think of that because one of the wonderful characters in this book is named John McKnight Bloss. He was a sergeant in the Civil War and in the Indiana Volunteers, and he served together with Corporal Barton Mitchell. And Corporal Mitchell was pretty old for a corporal. He was in his 40s when he was serving the war. And they won the war. Why? Because they were relaxing after marching all night, lying down on an open field in Frederick, Maryland, September 17th, 1862. And in that open field, Corporal Mitchell lay down, and they were waiting. They were brewing some coffee, and he was trying to get some rest. And he put his arm out like that, and he touched something in this hot, tall grass in a field they were lying in. And it was a bunch of papers wrapped around 3 cigars. And he thought, great, they love cigars. They couldn't afford cigars. They were soldiers. He takes the cigars, throws the paper away, and John McKnight Bloss, McKnight, says, wait a minute, what are those papers? They pick up the papers. It was General Orders number 181. They were personal orders from General Robert E. Lee that gave his entire plan of battle. And it was with those orders that General McClellan was able to intercept the Confederates and to fight to a draw at Antietam, and that allowed Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863. Now, here's the amazing thing. Lincoln told his cabinet, and there are 2 different eyewitnesses who wrote down his words. He told his cabinet, I was waiting for a sign from God to free the slaves. And then I received it. And he received it on the same day that he had said that he had asked God for a sign. That was the day, September 17th, that they discovered what's called the Lost Dispatch, which changed the course of history. Anyway, the story is amazing, and I still, talking about it and writing about it, thinking about it, gives me goosebumps.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
Everyone should buy the book so you can have it forever.
Thank you.
Great fun.
Well, we have it forever because it happened and saved the country.
I know. Well, it's just something that we forget about, though, and people need to make sure their children are aware of these miracles so that they can appreciate the country we live in.
Well, see, this is one of the things that I care about. We had another question about civility, which I appreciated very much, is that one of the things that allowed civility to flourish in the past was this shared sense that we were in a holy land, that we were in a land that had been uniquely blessed by God. And one of the problems is, America's so prominent, it's so unexpected, it changed all of history and emerged as this tremendously powerful country in a place where no one would have thought it. I mean, the North American continent was thinly settled. There was no major civilization here as there was in America south of the Rio Grande, the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas. So here is where this amazing civilization emerged. How? Why? And basically, it's so irrational, and so much about America and our great success is irrational. You're left with either one of 3 explanations. Either the explanation that says, okay, Americans were more rapacious and more cruel and more brutal in exploiting people than anybody else. That's what the left would like us to believe.
That's what they're taught in school now.
Or number 2, that it was just a collection of happy accidents. Or number 3, that it was a product of design, either by really, really clever people or by a higher power. And the problem with the first assumption is there were other countries that were more rapacious and more cruel and more brutal. How about Spain? How about Portugal? How about France? They were worse than the British settlers, and yet they did not enjoy the same success. So the great and unique success that allowed America to flourish was not the product of great cruelty, because countries that had greater cruelty had much less success. Then the other point, the idea that it's a pattern of happy accidents. A pattern of happy accidents is still a pattern. And I think looking for that pattern is part of why I wrote the book. Other questions?
Yeah, we have some that you may or may not be interested in answering. Here's one about your elected president and who would you put in the cabinet?
I think some of the people that President-elect Trump has selected are perfect. I mean, I think his choice of secretary to be DeVos, Betsy DeVos, is wonderful. I think his selection of Tom Price to be, there couldn't be a better appointment for Health and Human Services than Congressman Price, Dr. Price, who I'm proud to call a friend and who I know.
Do you think there are any departments that need to be eliminated?
Of course, yeah, and unlike Rick Perry, I can remember them. Yeah, energy. Okay, the Department of Education, certainly, probably the Department of Commerce, probably the Department of Transportation, And
Are
that's
these
a good start.
They're relatively recent.
Yes, except for the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce used to be, it was established by under President Roosevelt as the Department of Commerce and Labor. But then they separated Commerce and Labor. Did we really need a Labor Department? No, we don't need that either. I mean, and you see, each of these things generate their independent bureaucracies. I was just looking at it. The Department of Transportation, which really doesn't transport anyone anywhere, has 52,000 employees.
Oh my gosh.
And Elaine Chao, all right, fine. But a person that I would place in the cabinet in some high-level capacity. And I was very encouraged. Vice President-elect Pence met today with Condoleezza Rice. And I think Dr. Rice is one of those people I admire greatly and has a lot to contribute to our country in the years ahead.
So in what capacity do you think she should serve?
I'm not sure. I think she was a fine Secretary of State. I think she'd do wonderfully in that capacity again.
Do you think he's considering her for that?
No. No, I think that's very unlikely because he's been so critical of the Iraq War, which of course Dr. Rice was involved with. Mm-hmm. But next.
Okay, I'm buying this book for a friend who doesn't listen to the show. What is the one thing she should expect to get from reading the book? She should expect to get a sense that America is a purposeful country. The nature of American exceptionalism is not just that America is different, and certainly exceptionalism is different from American perfection. It's that America really exists and has always existed with a mission. And it's one of the things that our founders talked about. One of the things that was stunning to me in doing the book, and you know, because I used to come to you in the middle of the night and say, can you believe this? So people are saying it, is that people recognized at the time that this was God's hand. I'll tell you another one. I have a lot of chapters in the book that are like my favorite chapter, but probably my real favorite chapter is a chapter about somebody you've never heard of. And it's not just like Sergeant John McKnight Bloss, right? This is somebody who was really important, but no one's ever heard of him. He's erased from history. His name was Nicholas Trist. And he was the guy who was with Thomas Jefferson the night that he died, the day that he died, actually. It was the middle of the day of July 4th, 1826. And he helped to close Jefferson's eyes after he died. He was his private secretary. He was married to Jefferson's granddaughter. And he also was an aide to James Madison, and he was also an aide to Andrew Jackson. And then he was a clerk in the State Department. And he was sent by President Polk to Mexico to try to negotiate an end to the Mexican War. And he was negotiating. And then at some point, President Polk seemed to get the idea. They had what they called the All Mexico movement, where we had won the war, and there were people in the United States who wanted to take over all of Mexico and make it part of the United States. Now, this would have been a very, very different country. In any event, Trist continued negotiating. And at one point, Polk said, "You're fired." Sent him a letter, said, "You're terminated." Trist continued negotiating, ignored the president firing him. Polk sent down a squadron of troops to try to arrest him, right? To have him, and to bring him back in chains. He is negotiating. He felt driven. As he said, he felt called by something higher to continue. He negotiated in February of 1848. He negotiates finally with the Mexicans and gets possession of California, which was very important to him. He was upset. Now, nothing was going on in California. The same week that is happening, they discovered gold at Sutter's Mill. Now, the chances that the gold discovery was huge. It had a tremendous impact on America's entire economy because it helped to make America ultimately the richest country in the world because we had more gold than anybody else because it came out of California. And 350,000 people came out to California within 2 years, including your ancestors, right, who came for the gold rush. Diane's grandfather started the first Jewish newspaper in Southern California in 1897. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we should remind people that we're about halfway through of a book signing that you're doing.
Oh,
and
yeah, I
people
should
should
sign
buy
some
the
more
book. Yeah,
books.
he could even actually sign the books.
Yeah, but I like talking about it.
I know.
It's
I love it.
It's a lot
I
easier to
love
talk
it.
about it than to write it.
Okay, yeah, that's true. But people can buy the book and they can join in the conversation. If you buy a book, you can ask a question. So we are now going through a list of questions from others who have bought books. And do you want me to
Yes, go
choose
ahead. Hit another
one
question.
here? Okay, let's see. What do you say to those who feel that religion and politics need to be separated?
The idea that religion should be separated from politics is to diminish both religion and politics. There's no valid religion that doesn't involve political questions. It has to. It has to, because what politics really is about is trying to do the right thing. And religion should inform that. And the idea that there is politics without religion is also to diminish politics, because what kind of politics is it if you're not trying to do the right thing?
Isn't it true that in order to get a tax exemption, that religious institutions have to say they're not going to touch on politics?
Yes, they were not. No, they can certainly touch on politics. There's no problem at all. You can give opinions on political issues. You're not supposed to campaign
Advocate
for a specific candidate. By the way, I think that whole thing is idiotic. The whole distinction, in other words, the idea that you can go ahead and you can donate money and get a tax deduction if you donate to the Heritage Foundation. But if you donate to a candidate, you can't get a tax deduction. I think the whole idea, I would get the government out of that whole thing and basically, I hate to say it, not give tax deductions for charitable giving, just lower tax rates on everybody. But I think the whole idea of the government saying, okay, it's okay, we're going to give you credit and give you a pat on the head and give you a cookie for donating to this cause, but not for this cause, is simply wrong.
But charitable organizations are not going to approve of what you just said.
No.
I mean, this is how they reward givers.
You know, they've done a lot of studies on this. This is a different whole political question. But the one thing that I would say is that the religious exemption not allowing the government to tax religious institutions, I don't think the government should be allowed to tax religious institutions, and I don't think even if religious institutions end up campaigning for one candidate or another, that shouldn't be enforced either. This is what's called the Johnson Rule, named after Lyndon Johnson, that he introduced. And one of the good things about President-elect Trump is he's said we're going to get rid of that, which basically tries to censor what people can say from the pulpit, which is not what the founders had in mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Let's see. The recount is nonsense. What's the point if it's not expected to change the result?
There's no point. It is a stupid scam, and it is revolting and pathetic. And Jill Stein, the truly pathetic and anti-Israel, by the way, Green Party candidate.
What does she get out of it?
She's raising money.
For herself? She
Yeah.
can't keep the
She's
money.
raising money for the Green Party. She's raising money for the Green Party so they can sponsor these recounts. And by the way, they're raising much more money than the recounts are even going to cost. And it's a complete waste of time, and it's disgusting, and there is no point to it at all.
Okay, well.
So there, that's quick. Next one.
Okay, now that we've had a chance to see who the leaders of the Trump administration are, what could we predict about the future of our great nation?
That America is going to continue to be great, and to be even greater, and to maximize to be an American and to have open eyes is to be an optimist. I mean, I think about it. Here we are in our home. Mm-hmm. Think about your grandparents, my grandparents. I couldn't imagine. And again, and yes, we've been very, very blessed, but every American is blessed. You know, one of the things people don't realize, homes are important to people. America is almost unique in the world with a percentage of Americans. It's overwhelming majority. It's more than 2/3 who own their own homes. Mm-hmm. Really, today. And yes, there are people with hardship, but the idea that people cannot rise in America, that they are permanently oppressed, there are demonstrations all around us that is not true. And again, it's one of the things about the miracle of Lincoln. And one of the reasons I write about Lincoln so much. I mean, if you look, Lincoln had less than 6 months of combined education. He's the most brilliant individual. And if you look at the Lincoln family history, I write about what he referred to as the Lincoln horrors. A history of mental illness and difficulties in his family. And his grandfather, his father's father, was shot by an Indian who was raiding his frontier farm and killed when Lincoln's father, I believe, was 8 years old. Wow. There's tremendous hardship. The fact that, and by the way, that kind of story still happens in America.
All the time.
It happens.
I mean, look at the internet. These people who can just come up with an idea for an app and then make a lot of money. It's just good ideas are what brings wealth.
But also people who come from really difficult backgrounds. And, you know, I think of Newt Gingrich, for instance. Somebody people don't really. Newt's mom, I believe, was married 5 times. Newt actually took the name of a subsequent father who adopted him. And it was a family that traveled around, and they had no money. And in any event. And by the way, you could say the same kind of thing. Bill Clinton came from a very difficult background. And people transcend. And that's America. America's the country of new life and fresh starts. Always has been.
Let's see, the next question, which I haven't read before, so we'll hope it's good.
I'm sure it's good.
I'm sure it is. It's from Mark in Utah. He says, I would have thought that electing a man of a great moral character like Mitt Romney would be more of a substantive sign of divine providence than electing someone with dubious moral character. Do you have an historical example of two of when divine providence was evident in the election of a rogue?
I will tell you this, that when people elected Lincoln, they assumed it was a curse for the country. I mean, Lincoln, first of all, won election with a 41%.
It's interesting that
of the
Trump
total
compares
vote.
himself to Lincoln.
No, you
sure.
can't. No, you can't. I mean, Trump did not grow up disadvantaged. He grew up very comfortable. But here's the point: is that people referred to Lincoln, his chief general for the first years of the war, George B. McClellan, referred to him as the original guerrilla. They referred to him as totally unworthy. Lincoln had less experience in government or leadership than anyone who had been elected president before Trump. I mean, Trump has no experience in government or public work, but people underestimated Lincoln, and basically the fact that the unlikely story of how he won the nomination. This is a guy who had lost three different U.S. Senate races, including most recently to Stephen Douglas in 1858. He had been elected to Congress one term, 2 years only. That was his only Washington experience. And he comes in, he's a prairie lawyer with no formal education, but an incredibly brilliant mind. The American people had the good sense to elect him. And it is fair to say that no leader in history has so far outperformed expectations. And again, Lincoln saw himself as an instrument of God and became more and more religious. What's fascinating in the book, and I didn't know this before writing The American Miracle, Lincoln used to be what was called a free thinker. He used to be an atheist, and he wrote a tract when he was a young man denouncing the Bible, and his friends convinced him to destroy it because he used to circulate among his friends. And he said, you can't have this because it'll ruin your political career. He did destroy it. And then later in life, particularly after the death of 2 of his sons through childhood illness, he came back to God and Bible and read the Bible assiduously. The 2 books that were most important to him, the collected works of Shakespeare and the Bible, both of which deserve a lot more attention than they receive in our education system.
Which shows that you can go through phases in your development, and that you're not anyone is not necessarily stuck in one way of thinking.
Well, see, this is the story. My grandparents and everybody else. Transformation.
Oh, Marty in Oregon.
In Oregon.
I don't even know how long. And you?
Correct.
Because you came from the you came
Tell you the story very briefly. Is that I've been a book writer since I was a kid. I mean, really a kid. My first book came out in 1976, and one of the things that happens is when you do a book and it ends up doing very, very well. My first book was a book called What Really Happened to the Class of '65, which was about my high school class. And I did a lot of radio interviews, and I always had loved talk radio, however it had existed, because it's the theater of ideas, and you imagine what the host is like. And I really, really enjoyed doing the radio interviews promoting my book. I had a book that came out called Hollywood vs. America. It came out in 1992. And Rush was just starting the Limbaugh letter. And I think the second edition of the Limbaugh letter, I was the featured interview. And Rush spoke to me for the interview, and the interview went very well, and he got a good response from it. And then I got a call from Bo Snerdley one day, who was, of course, James Golden is his real name, and he's become a good friend of ours. And James said, "This is Bo Snerdley." It's James Golden from the Rush Limbaugh Show. Would you like to guest host for Rush? And it took me a millisecond. Of course, who wouldn't want to guest host for Rush? I said, and basically, he offered me that because of the message of my book and because Rush had enjoyed doing the interview with me so much. And I remember, it was really, I was hosting a TV show, Sneak Previews on PBS at the time. And I remember the first moment when my heart was thudding and, man, I'm going to start the first time I'm ever hosting a radio show. I'm hosting the biggest radio show in the world. And I loved it from the moment it happened, and I loved the callers, and I loved working with James, who, by the way, is one of the great guys in the world. And I still feel enormously grateful to Rush for giving me that opportunity. And I think it's terrific, by the way, that his series of Rush Revere books, his series of books for kids, are beginning to echo exactly some of the same themes in The American Miracle. The idea that, no, this stuff is not an accident. It has a purpose to it. Thanks for the question, and thanks for listening for so many years. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mary. Thank you. What's next?
Next, you have a question that's also personal. Between a 3-hour daily program, articles for USA Today, and the other various ventures you have, how do you find time for yourself to balance it all out? The answer is he doesn't.
Yeah, I'll let my wife answer that.
He's
by the
constantly working day and night.
There is a terrific, I'm very proud of the article that ran today, my column in USA Today, which is called 3 Democratic Delusions. And thank you for noticing. And look, it is a privilege and a joy to do this work. And I write about this at the end of the book. As people who know me and people who know the radio show know, and as my wife certainly knows, this book only came into existence really through the grace of God and my wonderful medical practitioners. I had cancer, and I had stage 3 throat cancer. I write about this at the very end of the book. And one of the things that really gave me hope and a sense of purpose during the whole period of illness and recovery, aside from my wonderful wife, was the sense that I had to do this book. I'd already started, I had the contract. And again, when you go through something like that, and she can tell you, the worst thing for me was 11 weeks where I couldn't broadcast because I had throat cancer. I couldn't talk. And
he tried so many times. We'd go back in the studio. He'd insist, "We've got to try. Jeremy, come and gather the team." And we'd go into and he couldn't drive, so I had to be there to take him because he was on cancer medication. Yeah. And so he'd go in there, and he tried so hard to do it. He really, really wanted to get back on the air.
Well, I think what's funny, and I don't remember this, when I was heavily medicated in the hospital, I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks. And you say, because you saw it, apparently I was doing the show.
He was doing the show under the influence of very heavy medication. I mean, he would be talking, and he'd say, "And now we're going to a break." And he'd be interviewing people. He interviewed someone from his past, from his childhood. He was just totally out of it. He was even.
This was not broadcast, by the way. Yeah,
no, it wasn't real.
But I was very, I remember being very focused. Well, it's time, it's noon, it's time to do the
But
show.
there was one time where you try to get out of bed and you're hooked up with all these tubes and things, and you try to get out of the hospital bed because you had to get to a speech. I've got to give a speech. No, and we're trying to tell you, no, you can't leave. You can't leave. I'm late. I've got to get to give my speech.
In any event, it's a privilege to be able to do this work and,
I'm glad you
to love it
recovered.
and enjoy it.
Okay, let's see. I don't even know what. Let's see. No questions, but love the books and your show. Keep up the great work.
Thank
should
you.
Hear that.
Thank you. Here's one.
Okay, I love your movie reviews. How did you get into that? Are you a movie buff?
My brother's a movie buff. I'm kind of a movie buff. I always was kind of a movie buff. But my brother Harry, the youngest of the 4 boys in my family, has always loved movies. And it's like many other things. I got into doing talk radio because of a book, Hollywood versus America. I got into movie reviewing because of a book. I was promoting a book on TV called the Golden Turkey Awards. It was a book I did with my kid brother, and it was about the worst movies ever made and the worst achievements in Hollywood history. And I got asked back to the same show on CNN 3 times. The 4th time I came back to do the show. And I loved it because each time you're promoting the book, right? Which is the idea of book promotion. And then Eddie Madison, who was the producer of that show, came up to me and said, how would you like to come back every week and review movies for us? So I was the first film reviewer on CNN. Mm-hmm. And this is when CNN was basically produced out of someone's garage, you know, and our studios in LA were pathetic at the time. And that's how I got into it. And then after that did British TV and then PBS.
And you're
here.
still doing it. Anyone who follows Michael Medved sees his reviews online, and you ask, what does he do to balance out his time? He's going to screenings 3 and 4 times a week, and writing reviews and recording
screening
them.
saw a terrific movie which opens Friday last night, and it's a movie produced by Steve McAveety, who is the same producer who did The Passion of the Christ, which I thought was an extraordinary film. And it's a film called Man Down, and it's really a remarkable performance. It's about a Marine and some of the very deep problems that he runs into with his service and then afterward coming home. And Shia LaBeouf plays this young man, and it's a remarkable performance, really an amazing film. Mm-hmm. So that's just a word on movies.
Someone else asked you, what's your favorite movie? The inevitable question.
Right, and she knows because we've been married for 31 years.
What do you
I know
think
she's
of
too
his?
young for that.
Come up with something different.
No, it's the same honest answer. My favorite movie of all time is a patriotic American miracle movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and with Jimmy Stewart and Claude Rains and Jean Arthur, and directed by Frank Capra, who was a loyal Republican, and amazingly, the screenplay was by an active communist. They didn't know that at the time, but it turns out he was. But it's a movie really about the greatness of America and the gift of constitutional government. The other movie that I absolutely love, and I would rank as my other favorite, is the great father-daughter movie ever made, called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It was the first film directed by the great Elia Kazan. And I've seen that movie a dozen times at least. I cry every time. It just gets you. It's about an immigrant family and the young girl. She's 11 years old at the time. It's based on a novel by Betty Smith, who wants to be a writer when she grows up, and her father, who has a lot of problems and is a complete failure, but she adores him.
Well, to wrap up, we have about 3 minutes left, and so we have a final question that brings us back to the American Miracle.
Okay,
what
great.
inspired you to have such an interest in American history?
Well, I mentioned a little bit earlier, I owe this, like I owe so much of everything, to my father, who was the most amazing man I ever knew, and most amazing person I ever knew is here. And but my dad had such an enthusiasm for the amazements of his own life. I mean, growing up really poor in South Philly, and he won they had a competitive scholarship in Philadelphia at the time. I think they still do, called the Mayor's Scholarship, which meant that you got a full scholarship, full ride to go to University of Pennsylvania. My dad went right into the Navy, graduated from high school in '44, so he went right into the U.S. Navy, came back after the war, and went to University of Pennsylvania. And in any event, and he loved it. He took me to Valley Forge when I was a little boy, a really little boy. I was like not 4 yet. And he told me the stories. And so he said, you know, George Washington, you can imagine him there on a big white horse. And he rode a big white horse. And he was a big man. And nobody else had horses. And they didn't have shoes. And they were walking in the snow. And you know what happens when you walk in the snow and you're barefoot? No, Dad, what happens? Your feet get bloody. They believe, oh no. He said, but they didn't give up hope because they knew they were fighting for freedom. And, you know, again, and then my dad, you know, I think for most kids, you want to do the things that are going to impress your parents. It's kind of natural. And my dad kind of figured when I was very young, boy, this is a good little kid to train with a pretty good memory. And so he gave me these little cards with the presidents on them. And then my dad would play with me about, okay, which president came after James Knox Polk? And there, you learn quickly, it's Zachary Taylor.
Of course. And
then Millard Fillmore. And then, okay. But see, it got really stupid because my father, we started with Supreme Court justices, we did secretaries of state.
You did that with our kids.
We did vice presidents.
Oh, you did composers with our kids.
Right, and remember, they used at one point they knew all the justices of the Supreme Court
Yes,
and chief
of course.
justices in order. And
Yes.
anyway,
Sam and PJs, I know.
right, the only Chief Justice of the Supreme Court named after a fish, because it is salmon like a fish. But in any event, and he put "In God We Trust" on our currency, and maybe that's the place we should conclude, because a lot of people don't know, and I mean, I talk about this idea of America as God's country, and I know I had a call today because this came up, or actually it was a guest I had today, Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, was on the show, and I was talking to him a little bit about my book.
I remember.
And he said, well, all countries think that God is on their side, but see, it's different. Because those countries, not to use sort of intelligent design evolution, but there is that. Most countries evolved. Britain evolved. Where does British history begin? Does it begin with the Celts? Does it begin with the Angles and the Saxons? Does it begin with the Norman invasion? Does it begin with the beginnings of Parliament as a center of power? Does it begin with Runnymede and the Magna Carta? Where does British history begin? I don't know. We know where American history began. Mm-hmm. We know. This country was not the result of evolution. France, how did France come into existence? It wasn't created, it evolved. Mm-hmm. America was created.
Yep. Just like in the Bible, the world was created.
But that's the point. And because, in other words, if you view, it makes all the difference in the world. If you view the existence of human life as an accident, as a collection of random interaction of chemicals, or whether you view human life as created in God's image. And I think it makes all the difference in our attitude toward our country, whether we view our country as some sort of accident or a combination of lucky circumstances or a purposeful creation. And I go back to this. Okay, you want to say it's a purposeful creation of these remarkable people of Hamilton and Jefferson and John Adams and George Washington and James Madison and people who got together, Benjamin Franklin. But see, all those remarkable people didn't see themselves as the creators. They saw themselves as instruments and were explicit about it. And I have the quotes in the book. Let me conclude with a quote, and it's powerful. George Washington is getting inaugurated as the first president, obviously under the Constitution of the United States. It's a big moment. And what does he say to his fellow citizens? He says this: This is his inaugural address, April 30th, 1789. No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand, and he capitalized in the text both invisible and hand. The invisible hand, which conducts the affairs of men more than those of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. George Washington told the truth, as he usually did. And to understand the truth about the American miracle, it seems to me, is to increase the amazing gratitude that we should all feel for living in the greatest nation on God's green earth. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this terrific experience. It was for me. And I'm hoping that, I don't know if there are other phone calls that we are going to respond to. No? Okay. I guess we're finished. But America continues, and yes, you can still actually...
Still buy the book. You can still go on.
Okay, you probably have noticed that...
as we go on.
Yeah, right. As we're getting ready to be dragged off here, and the trap door opens up, and we get swallowed up. Look, I care about this book a lot, and I think that the message of this book is the message that the country that I love needs right now, and hope you will share my enthusiasm for the American miracle. Yes, the book, but for the larger American miracle, which is this great country we live in. Thanks and good night.
This is like an online book signing thing. So I'll be signing books, and then I'll be answering questions.
We're going to take 3 phone calls from some lucky winners.
So just like if you stood in line for hours and hours, this is your chance to have a second with Glenn and ask him questions.
We're hanging out again. We are live here at Franklin Entertainment in the office, kicking it. Hi, guys.
I'm going to sign as we go, and you can buy, and we will ship this right to you. And we're also answering questions. Do you have any questions over there?
How does one get on The Bachelor?
As a seasoned comedian, do you ever completely bomb anymore? And if so, how do you deal? Oh, I have the best bombing story.
What's the most satisfying snack to eat while wearing sweatpants?
Have you girls ever thought about writing a book all together about your teen mom journey?
What inspired you to write about the things you write about in this book?
What is it like partnering with your sister on a business?
What's the most amusing question you got as press secretary?
Sean from California, you're live.
I would love to know what your favorite story that you covered for Inside Edition is.
I'm wondering, what do you do for you personally to recharge and refresh yourself?
I wanted to know what it was like seeing the stash plan for the first time when it was like a book and you had a copy of it.
I think I started crying, actually.
You did. You got emotional.
I
had like pure happiness. It was a wonderful moment.
This is great. I hope I get his voicemail. I think this is actually the wrong number. But anyway, I was looking to buy a used Vespa. It was on Craigslist. It was a purple 1973 Vespa. It was missing the seat.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Trump. You just made my year.
So thank you guys so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of your days. I hope all of you that asked so many questions get some sleep.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Thanks for tuning in, you guys. Bye.
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 Thank you for watching, folks.
Thank you, everyone. LiveSigning.com.
Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.
I believe this is as close to a hard wrap as I'll ever get, and this is as close to doing home shopping as I'll ever be.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm going to go get drunk.
Is that how we end it? I spilled water. I'm losing my voice. Mwah.
Are we selling books, by the way? Good.